Hi, this is Joe Avati and welcome to Church Street Studios, my Sydney studio where I record my podcast, A Serious Chat with a Comedian. Well, my guest today is an internationally renowned chef. He has a TV series which is syndicated all over the world. It gives us an interesting insight, not only to the food of Italy, but different food from all over the world, different cuisines, but he has his take on it. He's joining us all the way from Toronto. Let's go and meet him, Mr. David Rocco. David Rocco, thank you very much for joining us, mate. Now, so you're based in Toronto. Is that where you were born? Where were you born?
Born in Toronto. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And where are your parents from in Italy?
Well, my dad's from a small, well, not a small town, a town called Pozzuoli, right outside Naples. It's a suburb of Naples, where Sophia Loren comes from.
Really?
And my mom is from Puglia.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, but when people would ask me, what am I would say I'm Napolo-Canadese.
Yeah, really, I've never heard that. In the whole 22 years that I've been coming to Canada, I've never heard anyone refer to themselves as Napolo-Canadese.
Well, because there's a Neapolitan, there's something about, there's a Neapolitan sensibility that I feel is in my blood and in my DNA. And sometimes it gets me into trouble here. Right?
Now, okay, so tell us how you started. I mean, when you were young, were you cooking then? Who inspired you to cook?
Yeah, it's probably the same story that you might have heard with other Italians. You grow up in a very Anglo-Saxon neighborhood. On our street there was the Johnsons, the Ramseys, the Gallaghers, the Smiths, and the Roccos. Best friend Mark Johnson had a pet rabbit. We had rabbits in the backyard. He played with his. Mine ended up on the table.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And so food was just that kind of, that ritual that really was our identity. And, I look back and, there's a reason I'm doing what I'm doing. I mean, my parents used food as a connector. They were hairdressers. They were pretty advanced. I mean, they weren't the typical Italians. My dad had a very English clientele. But they used food. We had the neighbors over to our house all the time. Lasagna, and eggplant parm. I mean, this is, stuff that was so exotic back then. Sometimes rabbit. Which is a whole different story. My friend finding out. My mom, I said it was chicken. She says, no, sweetheart, it's rabbit. And I'm saying, Ma, keep it down, this guy, and then I see where I've come from and what I'm doing. And it's almost like obvious.
Yeah. And so what happens then? So you're a kid, you went to, what neighborhood did you grow up in, by the way?
I grew up in a neighborhood called Scarborough.
It's in
it's in the East End.
I know Scarborough very well.
Yeah, so there's some Italians there, but mostly in the 70s it was very very white, very Anglo-Saxon, and I felt like the poor immigrant. I really felt like the poor immigrant.
Yeah, right. I go to the Bluffs a lot down there in Scarborough.
That's right. It's So good memories, and certainly, I find it, those years very instrumental because although I'm Italian, I can kind of, I'm a bit of a chameleon. I grew up with a lot of the non-Italians, and my early years, I'd get my head kicked in because I'd have sausage and rapini.
Yeah, right.
And I find that sometimes I can use that to my advantage and fit in as a, kind of like the part of the institution here in Canada. I can go in not as Rocco, but more as David, if you know what I'm saying. Although now times have changed, it's kind of cool being ethnic.
Absolutely.
Whatever that ethnicity is. I mean, you've made a living from it.
Absolutely. I've been doing this for 22 years, and I think the names have become popular too. Like Rocco, really, once upon a time, you would have never called your kid Rocco, when you say Rocco like that. But I think Madonna, when she called her son Rocco or Rocco,
Yeah,
That started
absolutely.
the trend going. So okay, so there you are. So you grew up in Scarborough. You, what do you go to culinary school? How do you progress to where you are today? Please tell us about that.
Well, I wanted to be. I was always, into the arts.
Hmm.
In high school, we ended up moving to Woodbridge. So,
Oh,
fast
right.
forward.
Okay. Yeah.
Born in 1970, grew up the first 12 years in Scarborough,
Yeah.
and we ended up, but always traveling to Italy once a year. My
Hmm.
mom kind of, my parents insisted we had to have that real, connection with Italy on, annually at the, in the summer
Yeah.
vacations, all the rest of it.
Hmm.
1982, we moved to Woodbridge, and
Yeah.
that I think was a little more comfortable at that time. If you went to school with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you get your head kicked in.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And what was what was Woodbridge like? So for people who don't know, Woodbridge, from my travels around the world, there is nothing like it. It's a suburb that is just full of Italians. Um, and it's almost like a new area. It looks like a new area. You're not going to
It
find
is, yeah.
homes from the 1800s.
It's a
Yeah,
new suburb, and in
yeah,
fact, when we moved up, my grandparents, were kind of like probably in their late 60s or whatever it
yeah,
was. My grandmother knew a little bit of English because she had to. She also lived in Scarborough at the time. But when they
mm,
moved to Woodbridge, they didn't speak a word. They didn't have to speak a word of English. Every single bakery, cafe,
yeah,
restaurant, clothing shop, everyone spoke Italian. It was like
yeah,
Little Italy.
yeah. And I've never seen anything like it in all the little Italies around the world. There is nothing like Woodbridge. So what
And
was
nothing
Woodbridge like in
nothing is
1982?
large.
And
Nothing
nothing
is
is large,
large, right? I
exactly.
mean, it's a
Yeah,
big, it's almost like a town. It's like
yeah,
a little
yeah.
mini city.
Yeah, yeah, and I've always said, if there's a theatre there, if there was a theatre, it was a proper, theatre to watch a show, and in Woodbridge, I'd be there for months doing shows. There's nothing like it. So, do you remember 1982 Woodbridge when Italy won the World Cup? Did it go nuts? Because I
19,
remember
yeah.
watching.
Yeah, well, 1982 was that first summer of being in Woodbridge, and it was that real connection with your culture, your
Yeah,
identity, and not that I was embarrassed, but when you're a kid growing up, and you're with others with different ethnicities, or not even ethnicities. Let's just face
yeah,
it, it was the English. It was like
yeah,
the Robinsons, the Gallaghers, the Smiths. And
yeah.
and
The Munja
you're
cakes. You call them Munja cakes, right?
we call them munja kicks, absolutely,
Yeah, yeah.
with absolute affection.
Yes.
But you're
Yeah,
with all these cakers, right? And
yeah,
and
yeah.
we had the backyard with the garden. I mean, that was
Yeah,
like fucking strange. It was like with
yeah,
hockey sticks, my dad would hold up the
yeah.
the tomato
Yeah,
plants.
that's actually right. Yeah,
And we weren't even that kind of Italian, if you know what I'm saying.
yeah,
We were
yeah,
kind of like living this balance of Italian ethnic hardcore and really kind of almost being anglicized. We were very. I mean, my dad had a hair salon. He was, I mean, a hairdresser, and all his clientele were Anglos, were white.
Anglo-Saxons. Yeah,
Yeah, and so
yeah.
it was really interesting, kind of our balance that we had. And my mom, she came from Puglia. She came to Toronto when she was 6, so she speaks better English than me. You know what I'm saying? My dad came when he was
Yeah,
19. He
yeah,
has a bit of an
yeah,
accent,
yeah,
but when you do your shtick, I mean,
yeah,
that's my
yeah,
grandfather, but not my parents. My parents are a little
yeah,
more, it's
yeah,
really interesting. But then when we moved to Woodbridge, it was almost like my mom wanted us to actually become more Italian and really grab hold to our roots.
yeah. And so you went to Italy, and is that where the love of food came from?
Yeah, like,
Of cooking, though?
I have a vivid recollection of being like 7 years old, going to Naples, Pozzuoli, and not wanting to go because I had made the rep soccer team. So from house league, I made, and I thought I was going places. I was it was 7 or 8 at the time. I was just turning 8 actually. And I remember fighting with my parents because my dad was coming back. He was only going for 2 weeks, and he was coming back with my brother, who was 5 years older and was more competitive in his playing and all the rest of it. And he was older. So my dad said, no, you're going to stay with your mom. You're going to learn Italian. And I resisted. I was so angry. And I remember the first day going, my cousin, I was exhausted, vivid memories. And we went to the beach, and we went to get little tellini, vongole. And my
Yeah,
zia Franca made spaghetti con tellini, little vongole, and she had mozzarella di bufala. I mean, this is stuff that, listen, 1970, olive oil was exotic. So here I am having buffalo mozzarella, and the milk just dripping down my arm, and, having pizza. But that first meal was like, holy shit, I'm home. And I remember having no interest going back. And so that was, I was always a really good eater, my mom would say. And I remember food always being something that I'm eating. Okay, when are we eating next? And, I would come home to have certain dishes like eggplant parmigiana or, like whatever it was that from the meal from the night before, because I didn't want to take it to school because I was embarrassed, but I wanted to come home and eat it. So I would skip playing, recess with my friends just to come home for lunch and eat and then leave.
Yeah. Which is really the Italian thing to do, isn't it? It's almost like you're coming home, had a siesta, and off you go again.
Yeah. But
so
it was also
cooking?
So, cooking was always, I learned and started cooking. It was almost, it was through osmosis, just being in the kitchen. And I would probably say I started cooking when I was about 12, 13.
Yeah, right.
My parents were hairdressers, as I mentioned. My mom worked only on Saturdays. So we were home. And she worked during the week, but she would always make sure we were home either, if there was the odd time for lunch or to make sure she picked us up or she was home when we arrived. And so, but Saturdays, because my brother and sister who were older, it was like we could stay home by ourselves. And I was always making things. And, whether, it was just goofing around with reheating some pasta or some eggplant and, with Kraft singles, the really shitty cheese, right? American cheese. And it was always something I loved.
Yeah. And so where did you go from there? Were you professionally trained or did you just start working as an apprentice in restaurants in Toronto? Tell us about that trajectory to where you are now.
So I worked in a banquet hall when I was 14, just as a server. But I always remembered going into the kitchen just, to see, it was twofold. Number one, because I didn't feel like kind of clearing dishes and tables. So I'd always go in the kitchen, but I had an interest. So they would show me, and I would just kind of be there. And they were always like thinking, what does this kid want and why? Because back then, cooking wasn't what it is now. Cooking's kind of cool. Now kids are like, I want to be chefs, I want to be on TV and all that. Back then, you were a cook. It wasn't as glamorous. In fact, there was no glamour. It was like, really? Why do you want to be a chef? Well, why do you want to cook? Right. And saying that, I never wanted to be a chef. I never wanted to, be a cook. I wanted to just eat. That was, kind of my goal. Learn how to make something I could feed myself. And during high school, I was into acting. I was into modeling. I did a ton of commercials. My first commercial, as a matter of fact, was with Neve Campbell. Right. From Scream, and she was on some movies, Party of Five, and so I was always in the business. And then I started getting more serious, and I started taking acting classes, and I wanted to be a filmmaker. Now, I have to really credit my parents, my wife's parents, the Italian immigrant, because we never took no from anyone. Sure, we understood. Work hard, outwork your competition, and you'll be able to do it. Or if nothing else, they were our inspiration. They came with nothing, and they figured it out, and they succeeded. So, after high school, when I was like, oh shit, now I have to do something, I went to university for an economics degree, and because my parents would kick my ass if I didn't. It was like, you have to go to university. Yeah. Your brother is a lawyer, your sister, is a high school teacher or whatever. Yeah. And you're not going to university. Yeah. So, but I still wanted to act. I still wanted to be a filmmaker. And I always thought, I don't have to wait for the audition. I can do this shit myself. I can figure it out. So my wife and I, we got married young, and she was very instrumental. And we were taking acting classes. And I remember, taking acting classes, and we're like, after about a year or two, we're like, fuck this. We got to figure it out. We got to figure out how to create our own destiny. I'm not waiting for the phone. I'm not, and I remember even in that interim of figuring it out and auditioning, I would do extra work. I would do photo doubling. I would do stand-in. I was Matt Dillon's photo double on To Die For. I had a couple of roles, and I remember my agents always saying, why would you do that? It's like, don't do that. And I always thought, well, it's got to be better than staying home, waiting for the phone to ring. I mean, I'm on set, I'm making money, I'm seeing how people work, I'm seeing how lighting works, I'm seeing how people who are professional or not, or you're just learning and you feel productive. So anyway, fast forward 2 years later, my wife and I were, it was 1998. We're like, you know what, why don't we go to Italy and do a cooking show? At the time, there was a show called The Lonely Planet. It was a Brit who went around.
I remember that.
And it had nothing to do with food. It was just a guy who went around. And we thought, why don't we do something but via food? I went to Italy. I modeled in Italy and Milan and Florence. And I had some friends that were into camera work and, the big pigs of cameras back then. It wasn't like a cell phone or a little, you needed to, so I kind of called them up and I had this calling card and I would call them, hey, listen, come to Italy. And, and we thought, let's just go out for an afternoon and shoot. We went there. We did this very intuitive thing. We went around Florence talking to people, exploring the markets. This is in 1998. I mean, way before, cooking shows, travel shows really had that food element. We came back. My wife ended up editing it with our wedding videographer into a 5-minute little video with Mambo Italiano with Clooney, whatever her name was. Hey, Mambo. And it was just this really... So we had a contact at a production company, and I remember calling him up. He goes, I have 2 minutes. It was my wife's husband, but this, sorry, my wife's husband. Yeah, as if fucking, you didn't catch that. It was my cousin's husband. It was my cousin's husband and, distant cousin. And he's like doing a favor. And you can just tell he wasn't interested.
Yeah.
We went to his office and we said, listen, we just did this thing, a big fat VHS. He puts it in and he's like, he calls a producer, calls another producer. And we were there for 2 hours. 3 months later, we're in Italy doing 26 episodes for PBS in the US. And that's basically the story.
And that's La Dolce Vita?
Yeah. Well, no, that was a show called Avventura. That was called Avventura. Yeah. And so what was interesting, we ended up working with this production company. Now, of course, the sons of immigrants, the daughters of immigrants, we think we can do it better. We're like, we can do it better. And you know what? So after that experience, we're like, I think we're going to do this on our own. And I remember people saying, well, no, that's not what you do. You're a host. Just stay in your lane. Don't go outside your lane. Yeah, right. And, we had a bit of a falling out with the production company. We went to Food Network. I had a bit of a name, so I could at least make a phone call and see if they would see me. And they said, absolutely no way would we actually do a show with you guys. You have no experience, and really you need to partner up with one of these production companies. We got ourselves like the top entertainment lawyer. He said, you guys are crazy. You have to hook up with one of the production companies. My wife and I are like, fuck that shit. We're gonna go. We're gonna use our house money that we had saved, and we're gonna put it into a show and do a pilot, not a little segment, because we knew if we did a segment, we were gonna give the broadcasters the potential out to say, yeah, okay, that's a cute little 5-minute segment, but can you really do a whole show? Yeah. So through another producer, I was able to get the episode specs. Full-on 22-minute episode specs, commercial breaks, throws to commercial, recaps, the whole bit, and we had an opener too, like a series opener. We ended up doing a show. It cost us about $65,000 or $75,000. I remember it was a shitload of money. Like we shot for a week, and it was in Florence. It was the Dolce Vita. We went back to Food Network. Again, we only have like 10, 15 minutes. We said, we shot an entire episode, and they looked at us. They said, you guys idiots? So they put it in, they stopped, they called in some production executives, and I think it was like 6 weeks later, 13-part series, and we were on the plane to shoot where it was our production company.
Amazing. And now that show is syndicated all over the world. We even get it here in Australia. We see it.
Well, it's morphed. It's kind of really, it's morphed into this, from David Rocco's Dolce Vita, we did Dolce Italia, Dolce Southeast Asia, Dolce Africa. You
Dolce
know,
India.
Dolce India, and we
Yeah.
just finished during the pandemic Southeast Asia. Sorry, we did Dolce Homemade on. It's on in Australia on SBC or no? Help me out here.
SBS. SBS.
SBS. I should fucking know my broadcasters.
That's okay.
And
I've done the research. No, we see it here. We see it. It's fantastic.
yeah,
Now,
yeah.
can I ask you then? And okay, so that's great. It's fantastic that you've told us that, and there's some great little snippets in there as well. Some great little insights to people listening. You know, you've just got to go and do it. I remember doing the same thing with comedy. Either do I wait and get jobs to come to me, or do I go out and create it? And that's how I started my career. I started a one-man show, and then it went from there. Okay. Anyway, this podcast is not about me; it's about you. So let's talk about where you've been with this show. Because I've seen some of them, and I loved the one you did in India. I love Indian food. I love cooking with a lot of spices. Okay, that's my thing. And so that's what drew me to that particular season that you did there. What do you find, where was the most challenging place for you? Because you when you go there, you actually cook yourself, right? Where was the most challenging place that you found on all these series to cook?
You know, it's every season, every show, every episode has its own challenges. You know how man plans, God laughs. Well, producers plan in India to do shows, and Indians laugh, especially foreigners. But the difference is my Neapolitan kind of stuff. When you look at Italy or Napoli, it's like Bombay. It's like chaos. And I think that really helped me, because that mindset of, it's like, no problem. Yeah, Napoli's great. And it was like, okay, buddy didn't show up. No problem. We'll figure it out. We'll go in. We will create story. We will go to the market and figure it out. And, there's wonderful gifts when you're open as a crew. And so we have the flexibility. We worked with National Geographic. So after our first 6 seasons with Food Network and distributing, we kind of took a bit of a turn. We went to India and with National Geographic, and it was about the people and the places, and food was all part of it, but it wasn't stand and stir. It wasn't front and center. And so I think what happened, it allowed us to really be open to opportunities, open to the unexpected. We're in Johannesburg, and, things happen. Shit hits the fan. People that you plan to meet and say yes, from Canada or from our production company in Rome, 6 weeks earlier, we're going to meet you. They don't show up. Yeah, so you're there and you have 3 days and you got to figure it out, and you don't know anyone. Yeah. And so half my crew is Italian, half my crew is Canadian. So there's a really interesting kind of dynamic. And we always have this thing. My crew, we love people, we love food. We all go out and we figure out storytelling, on the fly. In this one instance in Johannesburg, we thought, we're in trouble, because it was our last days, it was our last 3 days. So there was no kind of moving schedule around, and Johannesburg isn't easy. We ended up going to the market. We ended up meeting someone who knew the Soweto Gospel Choir. We went to Soweto on a hunch. We ended up doing a show that I would say was almost like, inspiration from God. It was like this amazing, we couldn't have planned it if we wanted to. And it was probably one of those moments where you take that leap of faith as an artist, you take that leap of faith as a creative person, and see what happens. It was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I was particularly interested in the one you went to India, but I was also in Milan, because I've been to Milan many times, and I just found it such a hard place to find good places to eat. But I saw your episode. Tell us a little bit more about Milan, because you really need to delve deep into Milan, don't you? I mean, you went to a jail. Tell us about that. Just tell us about Milan, because it was a fascinating episode.
Milan, I think, is one of the great cities of Europe, and it almost is the polar opposite of a lot of the cities in Italy. There's a cosmopolitan kind of attitude. If you want great Indian food, Milan has it. You want great, burgers? Milan has it. You want great, Italian food? Milan has. Milan has everything.
Yeah.
It is inspirational. It is, amazing. So we went there and we took a whole different, kind of perspective, and it was about kind of the the mindset of the Milanese and how they see themselves, not as a city that's very provincial, that's very stuck, that's very Italian, but they're very open. So we went to a stall where this butcher who is a fourth generation butcher meets this Chinese guy, and they make Italian Chinese ravioli, which are basically, steamed, and what's cool is they do it in the Chinese tradition, but they also do it with ragu. And so there's a lot of this fusion. There's a lot of this openness that you don't have necessarily in Naples or in Palermo or even Florence for that matter. So Milan, you really get some insight into, I think modern Italy, and of course there's so much history there.
Yeah. Tell us about the time in jail. You spent a night in jail. Tell us about
that. Well, we after I think our seventh season of traveling around and seeing India, and we went to Italy. I think we did almost 75 episodes. We thought as a team, if we're going to go back to Italy, we're going to do stories that even the Italians don't know. We're going to find insightful, inspiring stories about what is the new face of Rome. Is it white? Or is it a lot of the immigrants that come, the migrants, the refugees? And there's this whole, there's a faction that, we don't want them. And there's other groups that say, well, what do you mean? We need people to, work in sectors that Italians don't want to work. We were immigrants. We have uncles that went to Australia, that went to Canada. Why are we being racist? And so you start kind of figuring out these stories, and they're all kind of shared via food. So in Milan, we went to a place called In Galera. And it was essentially this woman that.
Sorry, I'll just stop you there because just for the people who are listening who are not Italian, in galera means in jail.
In jail, absolutely. Yeah. And we went to this to In Galera, and this woman wanted to rehabilitate inmates, but guys that didn't. It wasn't just stealing a car or a cell phone. This is like some badass crimes, and she did it via food. Yeah. And she was able to work with the jail, the state, and create this opportunity where she was giving these guys that eventually would be released, and often they get released with no skill set, and more times than not they may find themselves back in jail. So she has a program where she teaches them how to cook, be chefs, run a restaurant. And you go in, you have to show your passport, you get security check. I mean, it is like you're in jail. And it was an incredible experience because of, what she's been able to do through food and really how she's allowed people she's given them hope, which is fascinating. And so that was, a really, amazing episode for us because, this was about the power of food, to give people hope, to allow people to give people opportunities. Our parents often fell into the restaurant business when they, 50, 60 years, our grandparents, maybe they started out as dishwashers and then they went to construction but those were the early jobs that a lot of these guys ended up taking on. Yeah. We actually, we ended up doing another episode in jail in Rome. Yeah. And it was, I don't know if you saw that, but it was fascinating.
No, that one I didn't see. Yeah.
Well, it was fascinating because, we in center of Rome, there's a women's jail, and with women that have done, like there was a mob boss in there, and women that have done some, some heavy duty stuff. And so we met this gentleman who, again, they're always food related stories, inspiring food stories. And so he started noticing that in Lazio, a lot of the pecorinos, the different styles of cheese that had this history were starting to be lost, because a lot of the shepherds, the older generation, didn't know how to read or write, and weren't able to share the legacy onto their kids who went to Milan for better jobs and all the rest of it. So
Sure.
this guy ended up working with the penitentiary in Rome to create a caseificio, which is a cheese shop,
Right.
to basically teach the women, again, a skill set, but also retain this legacy of these cheeses that were almost becoming extinct. And so he ended up creating this viable business where they got paid a little bit, but they also got the skill set. And they were making cheese that they were distributing all around Italy. And it were just really fascinating stories.
Yeah, well, I urge everyone to see that, especially the episode in Milan. I think was fascinating, and we'll have a look at that one too. Now, I'm not going to ask you what your favourite place is to eat in Italy because I'm sure there's so many places. If you're a tourist heading to Italy to eat, can you give us your top 5 destinations according to the experiences you've had? Because people love to hear this kind of stuff. In Italy, yeah.
Well, listen, I mean, there's 3 places I absolutely love. Milan for sure. But yes. I mean, Milan because there's a sophistication and the food is at a certain level. But it's also, not every place you go. I like Naples. I mean, there is an energy and there is a craziness. And, you might eat and someone will come with a tambourine and start singing Pino Daniele. You have this kind of energy and this, this style. I mean, it's the food I grew up with. So, I love Neapolitan food. I love the food in Palermo because it's Sicilian culture is very similar to Neapolitan culture. There's a bit of an Arabic influence, pine nuts, raisins, tomato sauce, fried eggplant. And then I love Florence because Florence, there's, I Fiorentini love their olive oil. That's my absolute favorite ingredient. And, you get a dish like papa al pomodoro or ribollita, and then you drizzle that really good olive oil, and it's like, oh my God, this is, I'm having dialogue with God. So.
Yeah.
Now, that's a hard question, Joe. That's a hard question. What?
I know,
name 5.
I know it's a hard question, but that's why I gave you 5. I didn't say just your 1.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, I can. Now I'm talking. I can go on and on. I mean, there's a place in Rome, and you can.
But people always want to know. That's why I always ask people who are in the food business, where are your favourite places to go and eat? Because sometimes also people say that the country towns are the best places to go and see.
Yeah,
there's that butcher, that famous butcher outside of Florence.
Dario Cecchini.
That's it. I've eaten there, and that was fantastic too.
Yeah,
it's just amazing what you can.
I'm going to surprise
you. Can have.
I'm going to surprise you. One of my favorite food cities in the world is Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Absolutely love Malaysian food or Malaysia because you have 3 distinct ethnicities in Malaysia. You have Chinese, you have Malay, and you have Indian. And now you have a second generation that is kind of doing a lot of fusion. And I go to Malaysia a lot, and I'm just like, I love the food there.
We're not far from Malaysia, mate.
I know.
You could, just go that little extra step, that little extra. So that's the thing that's interesting about people in Canada. When you say, one day when they invent a flight that'll get you here in 10 hours, you guys will be here. When you tell people in Canada how long it takes to get to Australia, they're like, oh my God, the thought of that is just horrendous. Yeah. But, we're not too far. Do you think we'll ever see you here? Do you think, what do you know about Australian food and cuisine? What sort of has made it over to your side of the world, in terms of knowledge about Australian food?
I know that it has great food. I have a lot of friends that are Italians, that are chefs that have gone, and unlike maybe, maybe in Canada our winters are so harsh, and the ingredients just aren't very good. I think in Australia they'll always say, the produce. You got the water. You have more access to, as they say, materia prima, really quality ingredients. So. I don't know much about Australian food, whatever that Australian dish is.
Yeah, well,
you guys eat kangaroo? What is it? Is that taboo?
No, I've never eaten kangaroo in my life. Actually,
is that something people eat?
Yeah, they do, but not often. I actually don't like it. It's very tough. It's very great. Yeah. It's a great source of protein, but it's very tough. I think Australia. The 2 things about Australia is that number one, I think it's probably the number 1 coffee culture in the world. We have probably the best coffee in the world, better than France, better than Italy. The other thing that we do very, very well, see, there's no typical Australian food. When someone says, "Oh, what's Australian food?" They'd say a meat pie, okay? But that's also, it's like the munja cakes. What are they? What's their? What's the Canadian food? Maple syrup. So it's not really that. But poutine, yeah, right. So, but Australia is very, very. I think it's the leader in breakfast dishes. We have a massive breakfast culture here, to the point where you have to book in some places to get in for breakfast. Otherwise, you will not get in. The lineup to get into breakfast places is huge. And I find that when I come to Toronto, I can just never find a place that satisfies my breakfast appetite.
See,
So
I can't eat breakfast.
Yeah, right.
Like literally, even if I skip dinner, I can only have an espresso. It's just my appetito. My appetite hasn't opened up. It's still asleep.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, we're very good for that. Well, hopefully we will see you here one day. Now, you mentioned that olive oil is your favorite ingredient. Let's talk a couple of little questions here. Your favorite utensil. What can't you live without, apart from a knife?
You know what? A cutting board.
Yeah, right.
I know it sounds ridiculous, but
no, that's why I want
a very thick cutting board and a good knife. It's like you do your magic there. And I just, nothing that wobbles, like a nice thick ass cutting board that you can put, whether you're filleting fish, you're cutting vegetables, it grounds you. It's a grounder to cooking. And it's funny because I actually thought about that today, because I was looking I was doing a recipe at home, and I was looking for my cutting board, and it was like, no, like, and it was like, it was getting washed, but it was like, I needed that one because you put the food on, it doesn't wobble, and it just grounds you. So, I don't know if that's a utensil, but nonetheless, it's,
sure. Of course it is.
Yeah.
Now, if I went through your cupboard, if I went through your pantry, what would be the ingredient that I would find that you'd probably be the most embarrassed about? And why would you have it, and how does it come in use?
I have, I eat pretty healthy. I don't want to sound boring. I know I should throw something at you, that's going to really open this shit up and like, wow. But like, if you were to open my pantry, you have like my olive oils, my pasta, my passatas, my tonno, Italian tuna, is a must. What else is there? It's I'm a bit boring in that case. I might have some peanut butter, right? Just because.
Yeah, right. Well, that's what I mean. Yeah.
But there's nothing to be embarrassed about peanut butter. Peanut butter's, in fact, I don't know about you guys when growing up, but when I used to grow up and go back to Italy, my Italian relatives wanted two things: peanut butter and maple syrup.
Yeah, sure.
It's like they couldn't find peanut butter in Italy.
Yeah, it's like here they can't find Vegemite.
Right?
So they ask us to bring Vegemite. Have you ever tasted Vegemite? Have you ever had it?
No.
Okay, I'm going to bring you, when I come to Toronto, I'm coming back in June, I will bring you some Vegemite. And I always trick people. I say, this is the Australian Nutella. Yeah. And then when they taste it, it is nothing like Nutella. So they're expecting this nice sweet thing, and it's terrible.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
What is a hack that you would teach people who are amateur chefs that would really enhance their cooking?
I would, a hack. I would say Italian food and Italian recipes are all hacks. There's a simplicity to it. But again, it always goes back to la materia prima, the quality of the ingredients. You have cherry tomatoes. You have some really good olive oil. That's all you need. It doesn't take a lot to make a good Italian meal. But the hack, number one, please don't put the tomato sauce on top of the white spaghetti like in those commercials in the 70s. Make sure you mix it in with a little bit of pasta water pre-al dente. That to me is like, people are starting to learn more and more because, let's face it, Instagram and this and that, people are understanding. But that's probably the biggest thing I'd always teach people when I would do cooking classes. It was always about the pasta water and the starch and bringing the pasta out pre-al dente. So, you can kind of, create that, that creaminess that, have the starches get released and the sauce becomes to, it binds to the pasta.
Yeah. How did, you were speaking about Instagram. How has that affected your business? Have you seen it as opened up, or has it taken away your time in the kitchen having to worry about doing all that kind of stuff? Explain to us how that's affected you.
Yeah, social media is a love hate. I mean, or
Hmm.
actually more hate, quite frankly.
Right.
I recognize it's the new medium. It's a reality. I fortunately have someone that does 95% of my posts and
Yep.
allows me to distance myself because it becomes a rabbit hole. And
Yeah.
you go down this rabbit hole of getting sucked in, and it's tough. I say to my authors, it's the end of civilization. I mean,
Yeah.
the meanness and the people that come after you and all the rest of it. And
Yeah.
so, but I obviously make money off Instagram. I've
Yeah.
got a lot of corporate, gigs,
Yep.
also, endorsements that they want to have me, promote things. I've had people, I mean, it's allowed people to have an immediate connection. You can meet or connect with anyone, anywhere in the world. 20
Yeah.
years ago, if I wanted to talk to Joe Avati, it would be pretty hard. I'd have to probably email you and hopefully you get it. Now I send you a DM, good chance I'll see that you had seen it. You might
Yeah.
respond with a thumbs up
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you reached out and, the same way.
Yeah.
So I think there's some good in it, but I mean, I struggle with it because it does kind of suck your energy, but I
Yeah.
recognize, it's the new world and I can't resist. And, it's like Elvis and rock and roll and his fucking dance moves. Like I'm not going to fight it,
Yeah.
but I'm gonna allow myself to distance myself by having my office help me out with some of that, and when I'm able to make those connections, I do, and certainly I go through things and to see
Yeah.
what kind of reaction we get, or at least how things resonate with people. But I try and stay off it as much as possible.
Yeah.
If that makes
Now,
sense.
yeah, sure. A lot of people, had to struggle through COVID. I'm really starting to see a lot more people who learnt from it, especially entrepreneurs. What positives did you take from that time off during COVID, and what did you
Well,
do?
Well, I was actually I was on the last flight out of Malaysia. I was there because I'm opening up a restaurant in Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah,
So I might be in Australia sooner than you think.
great.
But
We'd love to have you here, mate.
yeah, but when I got on that last flight, it was nerve wracking. I got home and it was pretty amazing because I remember speaking to my wife and I said, "This is a crazy opportunity for us as a family." I travel at that time, even now, not as much, of course, as I'm getting back into it, but I was traveling anywhere from 20 to 22 weeks a year.
Mm.
My family would join me for a bit. And so there was, but I mean, I would be on the road without them for at least, 15 weeks. And I said to my wife, I go, this is an opportunity for us to spend time with each other in a way that there was no rush to get to the office. We weren't going
Sure.
anywhere. We were locked.
Yeah.
We were in lockdown.
Yeah.
And I said, in 40 years or in 60 years, when our kids have grandkids, they're going to say, I remember that moment. I remember that time. And I said, so we have an opportunity as parents to really make this special. And I remember, like most people, it was about cooking together, doing things and all the rest of it. My kids were doing online learning, and it was like, really, no one was learning. So I would say, guys, let's make cookies at midnight. We were cooking together.
Yeah.
And I have to say that what I'm reaping right now with my new series, Dolce Homemade, and the new sauce and pasta line. It's not a plug, but it's actually coming to something
Well,
here.
no, I was going to talk to you about that
Yeah.
anyway, so you might as well talk about it
Yeah,
now.
was a direct result of COVID.
Yeah.
And I remember it where my daughters loved picking up the camera and telling me things. So because it was like this way of spending time. It was we weren't going out much. I mean, it was March. It was pretty cold in Toronto still, and we ended up doing home videos. And my daughter goes, Dad, why don't you do shows here instead of having to go away? And I'm like, yeah, Em's no. And then we started kind of back and forth. And I called my director and I said, hey, listen, Emma's kind of been putting this bug in my ear and about doing a show. And we really want to do it like our last few seasons for Nat Geo, where we have people come in to my home. And it's a bit of chef's table meets, Joe Avati podcast. People talk about purpose. People talk about their love of food. People talk about what they're up to, but in and how food's changed their life. So we developed this show where my daughters were really instrumental. And I remember when we shot the pilot, my daughter said, no, Dad, it looks too Food Network. No, it has to look more BBC. It has to look more documentary. It has to look like, there. And then during that time, there was the whole, the meal kits from the restaurants. Every restaurant was doing meal kits, your pasta, your sauce, your this, your that. And so my daughters were like, oh, Dad, can you make this? Can you make that? And, I nothing to do. I was making dishes that would take 4 hours to make on a Sunday. A ragu I was making on a Tuesday afternoon for the fuck of it because I had nothing to do. Yeah. And so, my daughters would always say, oh my God, Dad, this is so good. Why don't you just bottle it? And, it was like, ha, ha, ha. But when you were in that kind of environment, hearing it once, twice, and then, it kind of lit something in my mind to say, there's an opportunity here. There's things I want to do. And I think I'm at a stage now in my career where it's not going to be as hard as maybe it once was. I can actually go do it and get this pretty much on the shelves pretty quickly. So, that summer in 2020, I ended up reaching out to a buddy of mine who's one of Canada's biggest food importers. We were back and forth. I'd done some work with them, and I kind of broached the subject with him, and he says, he goes, let's develop this. And 18 months later, we were nationally in Canada at pretty much all the supermarkets, and we'll be in the US on Amazon as well as Amazon Canada. So, and maybe in Australia, there is a distributor out there who's reached out.
Yeah, so great. Well, we'd love to have your products here. Did you, during the pandemic, was Aperitivo in Yorkville open, or did you open it after?
Well, it's funny because, sometimes people are, what have you been up to? I'm like, not much. No, it was, actually it's funny. I totally forgot. Oh yeah, shit, I did that as well.
Which is my favorite place to go, by the way, in all of Canada. Yorkville is such a great place because it's really the only thing. A lot of the major cities in Australia have a lot of Yorkvilles in them.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's why I felt very much at home. If you want to find me in Toronto, I'm in Yorkville.
Yeah. We definitely have to connect at my bar. Literally, it was a cold, miserable week in December. We were back into lockdown. COVID rates were going up. I live about an 8-minute walk from my office. And so our editors, we have one room with editors, and editors work at home. So, my wife was like, you need to get out of the house. You need to get inspired. Yeah. So I'd go to the office every day and I would work, and I'd see the editors at one end, and, they'd send me shows because we were doing shows at that time. Yeah. And I'm walking and I see this for lease sign, and, I'm looking, and a buddy of mine was the listing agent. He kind of said, he's like, come on in. And I'm walking. I was walking home, right? It was late at night. And he goes, Rocco, he goes, why don't you open up a tavola calda? A little bit of eggplant parm, a little veal cutlets, sausage on a bun. I'm looking at this place. I go, wow, tall ceilings. I said, 560 square feet. And I said, you know what? When can I let you know? He goes, I'm getting an offer tonight, but I'd rather hold it for you. And I'm like, come on, Sam, don't bullshit me. So I went home and I said to my wife, I go, listen, there's a little place. I go, I've never noticed it. It's like a little hole in the wall, just like you find in Venice, just like you find in Florence. And I said, I want to open up a little aperitivo bar. And my wife said, you're crazy. I said, okay, but just come and see it. She came with my daughters, and the first thing they said was, Dad, this is really fun. If you do it, though, you have to do it like the ones in Venice, because we were in Venice 2 years earlier, where everyone kind of stands up and there's wine barrels and all the rest of it. So it was a really an interesting kind of process. And my wife said, listen, you've always wanted to do it. If you want, do it. And so, you know what? I sometimes say I must have shit for brains because I went to do it when I was pretty busy, but it's
Yeah.
actually been a lot of fun.
No, it's actually a cool spot. I mean, you were in France when I was there, and Ernesto, our mutual friend Ernesto
Yeah.
Nigro, and I, we had a nice Aperol Spritz on a summer's day at there. It was fantastic. It was really good.
Thank you.
Um, now, what I love about the food scene in Toronto, or in Canada in general, is there's some really old school restaurants. And like there's that steak place, I think the Hexagon. I think it's
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Up in
the Octagon.
Thornhill.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in
The
Thornhill.
Octagon.
Yeah. What do you know? What are some of your favorite places to eat over the years? You know,
In Toronto?
in Toronto and even in Montreal. You know, any of your travels.
Well, yeah, it's funny. There are so many, and I love going into Chinatown, Spadina, and just kind of going to the little dumpling
Yeah.
places. I love Asian food, and just
Yeah.
kind of a lot of them
Yeah.
don't even
So
have
do I.
names. A lot of them only take cash. It's like it's just like these little places. I have to
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
I don't really go for Italian food. I don't, like steakhouses. Yeah, they're okay, but it's not kind of my jam. I
Mm.
really like to go to the,
Yeah.
on Gerard, Little India. There's all the little
Yeah.
places, that, some people would say, like, where the hell are you taking me? But they're really fun. They're really, they're unique. They're different.
Yeah, great. I mean that Chinatown is massive. It is
Yeah.
massive. It goes for
Yeah.
blocks and blocks, and it's very
Yeah.
deep as well.
Yeah,
You know,
I mean,
yeah,
yeah, and there's such cool places that
yeah,
you go and you can just walk up and down and have different bites and it's you're not going to impress anyone. If I was to take you, it's not about impressing you. It's just for a really
yeah.
fun
No,
experience, right? And
yeah.
and
Oh, don't worry.
I
I've ended
prefer,
up there many a night.
yeah, no,
Many
of
a night
course, and
after a show, David, I've ended up in Chinatown.
yeah, and I prefer that type of experience, that kind of dining experience. Even for me, like in my bar, I certainly have a certain attitude that we don't have a phone. We don't take reservations. Our philosophy is if you're in Barcelona or you're in Milan or Venice, would you ask for a reservation at these places? They would laugh at you if you went to Barcelona at a tapas bar and asked for a reservation.
Yeah.
You know what? You show up. If you have to
Show up.
wait, you have a glass of wine and you wait on the sidewalk or we squeeze you in, you stand up and you make friends on the spot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, since you spoke about Barcelona and you mentioned Kuala Lumpur, your favorite place to eat is Kuala Lumpur. My favorite place is San Sebastian and Barcelona.
Yeah.
Spain is just fantastic to eat.
Amazing. Absolutely.
David, I have one last question which I ask everybody, and it's along the lines of, what do you do to live your best life? What are the kind of things that you do that make you tick, that make you thrive, and that make you get up out of bed every morning and do what you do?
Joe, I feel blessed. I mean, when I look at my career, I'm like, holy fuck, I'm a lucky son of a bitch. I get to eat, I get to drink. I've done 210 half-hour internationally aired episodes of traveling, eating, and meeting people. And this is why I opened up Bar Aperitivo. Two things I absolutely love: meeting people and eating and sharing a meal with them. And it's really interesting because I was doing some pasta and sauce signings at the supermarkets.
I saw that on Instagram recently. Yeah,
we just launched.
Yeah.
And I would have the nonna come up to me, or the 30-year-old mom, and she says, "I used to watch you when I was 8 years old." And I used to watch you with my mom. My mom is no longer alive. And this one woman mentioned this. And she goes, "Every time I watch you, you make me feel closer to my mom because your recipes are like hers and you bring joy to my family. Now my daughter's watching it." And you kind of realize that this is pretty good. I am living my kind of purpose. I've said no to opportunities more than I've said yes. And when it doesn't feel right, to endorse this or do this. And I've always taken the approach of, does it feel right? And what is my purpose? My purpose is, people and food and really making a connection with them. So I get out of bed and I know that, I'll walk the streets and I love talking to people and having a coffee and this is what I do.
Well, great. Well, I'm glad that you do that because you've given us some great insight What I really particularly like about your shows is that we see different things that we don't normally see, and that's what I when I go to a city, I don't want to go to the beating track. I've done the touristy things. Let's go onto the side streets. Let's go to the back streets. Let's go and see what the people here. Let's see what they experience. And you've done that very, very well. I commend you. Thank you very much for being a guest on my podcast, and I look forward to breaking bread with you. Hopefully, are you going to be in Toronto in July?
Listen, I'm supposed to be filming, but you know what? We got to figure it out. You know, So let's really meet. I would love to. I'm a big fan. I have to tell you, I watched your show at the Mel Lastman Square, North York.
Yeah.
This was like in 2005.
Yeah.
And you know, you also make that connection with your audience, and all of us there can identify with what you say, and that's what makes it so funny and what makes you so brilliant. So thank you.
Thank you very much, mate.
Yeah.
Thank you
and
very
we'll
much.
do it.
Grazie.
Ciao.